All right. So in front of me here is a split ergonomic keyboard that's known as the Elora from a little company called splitkb. In short, this keyboard really has a lot going for it. As opposed to many of the other sort of more hobbyist keyboards, this is a keyboard that you don't have to do any soldering on. When you buy this, the only thing you need is a screwdriver and you can put this thing together. It's also a keyboard that's pretty easy to expand. You don't have to go full in immediately. You can also get accessories later. And there's a couple of good design decisions in this thing. So what I wanted to do in this video is just give my review. I'm going to talk about the ups and downs. In particular, I'm going to try and discuss some of the interesting design decisions in this keyboard, such that if you are in the market for a keyboard like this, you have more information to go on. And maybe the best place to get started is to just talk a little bit about the hardware, and in particular, about the shape of this keyboard. Right off the bat, this is what the keyboard looks like, and this is what it looks like when I put my hand on the keyboard. Now, one thing to notice right there, my fingers are flat. Like you can really see my hand being flat here. And when I do that, you can see that my fingers are actually naturally resting on the A, S, D, F buttons. And that is because this keyboard does a fair amount of pinky stagger, as it's called. There's a very big distance between the S key over here and the A key over there. And you could argue, at least for my hand, that that's a very natural resting position. It's because they really go for this extreme difference between the A and the S key. And let's contrast that to a different keyboard. This is the Moonlander. And you can see that I've got the A, S, D, F keycaps over here. But you can see that the stagger here isn't nearly as much, which also means that if I put my hand on it, if I want to rest my pinky there, then I'm going to have to angle my hand a bit. And that could be fine, it's just a design decision. But one thing you do immediately notice is that this keyboard has made the choice to at least do a fair amount of pinky stagger, which means that your fingers are naturally just a little bit more straight on the keyboard. In practice, what this does mean is that it can take a small while before you get used to the keyboard. And that is mainly because most keyboards don't have this extreme pinky stagger, so your pinky is gonna hit a few buttons wrong in the beginning. I have noticed, though, on the long term, that this is actually pretty darn comfortable. I have found that if you get used to this and then move back to a keyboard without this pinky stagger, that it can be kind of awkward because it forces your hand to kind of twist a bit. There's also another interesting thing about this design, and that is the thumb cluster. There are 2 rows for your thumb, and you can see that they really follow a nice circular motion. In short, that's a really nice design decision. A lot of keyboards try to have a straight line, but your thumb really likes to move in a circle over here, and it's just really nice that you're able to hit these 3 buttons very comfortably. Now, you might think at that point, that's great, but how do you reach these 2 buttons over here? It feels kind of off to have 5 buttons here, and have only 3 buttons that are easy to reach, because it kind of feels like you gotta move your hand forward in order to hit these 2. That aspect of it is a bit weird in the beginning, until you realize that this is something you can customize yourself. One way to go about that is to use different keycaps. So here's a keycap that is quite flat and has a nice angle to it. And all of these keycaps are kind of homogeneous and have the same shape. If I were to just remove one keycap over here and replace it with this one, then there are a few things that are just kind of interesting. One is that this keycap actually fits the shape of my thumb a bit better. It's turned upside down, by the way. But also because there's a bit more of a low ground here, hitting this one is actually less awkward. So that's a direction you could go in. You can also go for a very flat keycap here and a very high one on the end there. That is totally a technique you can try and do. However, the technique that I have been relying on most, and also the technique that I've found most of my liking, is to use these keycap tilting bits. I've shown them in a previous video before, and it's a bit of a party trick, but effectively what this allows me to do is it just allows me to put an extension into the key switch over here, and then I can put the keycap on that, and then I can introduce a little bit of height, and also an angle. And this is a tall piece. I also have pieces that are a fair bit shorter. Let me just put that on. And there you go. If I were to angle it a bit more like this, it's probably a little bit easier to see, but you can see that the front row over here, that's still relatively easy to reach with my thumb over here, but the 2 keys on top here are just a little bit higher. So that means that the only thing I gotta do is just very gently move my thumb up, and I'm able to hit those other 2 buttons. And that's just kind of nice. It is an extra investment you're gonna have to do on top though, so that's like, and that's also kind of in the nature of these kinds of keyboards. They're really meant for customizing if you will. But I gotta say, it is really nice to have 5 keys available to your thumb that are all pretty easy to reach. And one extra benefit, I think, of these tilted keycaps is if I were to sort of move my thumb down like so, that works. But part of me does think that the thumb is not meant to move down like that. If there's a light switch under there, it's probably fine, but it does feel more natural that the thumb also moves in a little bit. And there's something about this angle for the thumb cluster in particular that just feels like it makes it a little bit more comfortable to me to press at least. If you squint your eyes, you've probably also noticed that I did the same trick on the upper row over here. There's a little bit of a tilt such that for those buttons over here, it's just a little bit easier to press. I don't know for sure if I'm gonna keep this top row with the tilting kit. Well, time will tell. But I will say the tilting kit for sure is a win on the thumb cluster for me. That makes it so much easier to be able to hit all of these buttons. And yeah, just having 5 buttons available for each thumb, that just introduces so much flexibility. So that's definitely super nice. If you want to, though, there's also this extra thing that you can get, and that is that you can buy a puck that fits nice and snug under this keyboard, which you can then also use for tilting the entire keyboard. There's lots of ways that you can attach your keyboard, if you will. The website also sells these. Manfrotto is the name of the brand. It's basically like a mini camera holder. That's what they're initially designed for. But they kind of give your keyboard just enough feet that you can put it down and have like a slight angle. You can also find other ways to mount your keyboard, and if you go on Reddit, you'll find no shortage of people who are exploring that domain. But if you're just using your desk, this doesn't introduce a whole lot of height, but it does introduce just enough tilt, I would say. If you wanted to go for a more extreme tilt, that's also possible. The main thing you would have to invest in is one of these. It is basically a camera angle extension kit. And I'm just going to give a quick demo of what that might be like. So I have my camera pocket, so to say. I'm just going to put this in a more comfortable position to screw in, but let's... There you go. Note that if you are ever going to do this, you can move the puck all the way to the edge here. That just makes it a little bit easier to turn this screw over here. And that's kind of important because that determines the angle for the top bit. But let's say I would like something like this. I can screw this in. And there you go. This is now something that can neatly stand on the table, and I have a very extreme tenting angle that I could go ahead and use for typing here. This combination definitely offers a lot of flexibility. It really does offer a lot. I do want to mention, though, that the main downside of this is that it does take a bit of time to sort of pack it up and pack it in again. There is a lot of screwing and unscrewing you're going to want to do if you do stuff like this. So for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to put it back in the original mini tented position, but do know that you can get very extreme tenting angles going with this. So far, we've got the pinky stagger, we've got the nice thumb cluster, we're able to tent, that's also nice. It is fair to observe that for some of these features, you're going to have to buy something extra. Like this puck in the bottom over here, that is an extra add-on. But there are also extra add-ons that are optional. And in particular, you can get this Founders Kit that allows you to buy this rotary encoder that allows you to click, and you also get a knob that you can turn around. And you can also expand it with these extra buttons. And if I recall correctly, there's also a little thumb cluster, as well as some electronics that just allow you to interface directly if you want. I gotta say, the rotary encoder, does what it says on the tin. No complaints there. The one complaint that I do have is that there are LEDs on the rotary encoder as well as on these buttons, and the LEDs are not programmable. That is a bit of a bummer. Instead of having these Myriad modules on the side with these extra controllers, so to say, you can also decide to go for a screen that you put on here, but all that stuff is optional. If I were to pick, I would probably not do any expansion because the board as is already packs plenty of features, but do check the website. There are these expansion modules that you can buy for this. However, one thing you should remember when you use this keyboard is that there is a risk of short-circuiting if you're not careful. When you use the keyboard, you should always plug in this audio cable first before you actually go and plug the USB in. If you don't do that and you accidentally plug it in later, there is a risk of short-circuiting. And the warranty doesn't cover that. There is, however, one extra party trick that you'll see the moment that I plug it in. And that is that this keyboard also comes with Underglow, which is a bit of a party trick, admittedly, but it is also just kind of nice to have. You can specify the color of your liking. Unfortunately, if you want to have different layers, then the color that you have in the Underglow here is not configurable via VIAL, which is the main software that you get when you buy this keyboard. You are going to have to dive into the QMK rabbit hole yourself and sort of flash your own firmware. It should be doable, but it's not something that I was willing to do. But yeah, you do get a bunch of benefits like this. I can move the keyboard around, I can split it the way I like, and there's definitely comfortable typing angles. I guess one thing I want to quickly show as well is just the software that you get for this. And again, you can go down the QMK rabbit hole, but as is, you get a keyboard that has been flashed to be able to be compatible with a software kit called VIAL. As you're able to see here, the layout that you see on screen matches what you see down below, with the slight exception that for these Myriad modules that you can buy extra, those are also on display even if you don't have them installed on the device. So for example, this dial over here shown on the bottom right, and in the base setting that I've got, it is set to allow me to do scrolling. Basically, every time you turn, there's a little tick, and those ticks get interpreted as a button click, and there's lots of media settings and buttons and things that you can configure here. One of the cool features is that you can do this thing called tap dancing, where you can program a key to do different things depending on how you're using it. So here I've got a tap dance key that on tap, that's just pressing F, but if I hold it, then it becomes shift, and this is known as a home row modification. I've installed that as well as a few layer keys. In particular, one layer that I've configured here is the mouse layer. So because this is based on QMK, I can control the mouse using the keyboard, and I can left click and right click. That's all stuff I can configure from here. There's different videos in my channel that explain this software kit more thoroughly. The main thing I want to mention is that even though this doesn't allow you to program everything, it is decent software. You can really get quite far. Even though it is a bit of a GUI where you're going to have to click around a lot to get it just right, you do get about 90% of the way compared to like other software kits that come with a vendor that has it built custom. So no complaints about VIAL. Like I definitely enjoy using it. And I guess one thing that might also just be good to show is what it can actually be like to type on this thing. So this is a nice keyboard. It is for sure different than most keyboards, mainly because of that pinky stagger. Exclamation. So all in all, I'm actually quite positive about this keyboard, especially if you look at the price point. If you already have your own switches and if you already have your own keycaps, then you're definitely going to be below 200 bucks, especially if you go for a not too advanced setting. It is definitely a affordable keyboard. However, there are a couple of downsides that I do believe that I should mention. The first downside is that if you want to make use of this key cluster over here, I do think the main way to get there is to use the tilting kit. And that means that you're going to have to maybe talk to a different vendor to get the tilting kit. I'll leave a link in the show notes. But if you're going to use the tilting kit, you might also have to invest in different switches. So you'll notice that I'm using a box switch over here that comes with housing. Not every box switch, unfortunately, works with this, and it's very hard to say up front which boxes will. But if you're able to get a good box switch for this tilting kit, you're going to get way less wobble. And the wobble is actually a thing for some of the switches if you're going to be using this tilting. And it can be a minor annoyance, but I do want to be upfront about it. Another slight, and I think this is a design decision that could be improved upon, but I've noticed for the Myriad cluster, especially for this rotary encoder, notice what happens when I press it. You might notice that the PCB starts flexing a little bit. I have to apply a fair amount of force, and the reason that it's flexing is because there's no screw in the plate over here that attaches on the other side. And if this is the point where a lot of force is going to be exerted, I would have expected some sort of a screw here that would prevent the flexing inward from happening. This is only going to be an issue if you want to use the rotary encoder, obviously, but still, that was a minor bummer. I also think it's safe to say that in the end, because this is kind of a hobbyist keyboard, the build quality does depend on you a little bit as well. I actually lost one of the screws that's supposed to go into this thing that holds all the plates together, and I do find myself re-screwing the screws in because they do get loose after a while. And that is an annoyance, but at the same time, what I could also try and do is see if I can get like a 3D printed case made for this. That might be a good idea in general. But in terms of build quality, it is in the end still a few plates on top of each other. And that also means that you should expect after a couple of months or maybe a year that you're going to get some dust inside of this thing. Then, as far as the tilting goes, there's also one downside on that front. If you go to the splitkb website, you can actually buy lots of decent accessories. So I've got these wrist rests, for example. And when you're tilting your keyboard, you might also need a bit of extra height. And I was kind of wondering if maybe these pads would do it for me. But unfortunately, they're not really high enough. This is, I think, a common complaint that I do have with a lot of these more hobby keyboards, if you will. And that is the fact that they usually don't come with a palm rest. It might just be me, but if you're used to keyboards with a proper palm rest, it is really hard to kind of go back because you just expect to be able to sort of rest your hands a bit. And if I do that here with the tilting, then my hands start doing this again. And that's something you want to avoid. So if you're going to be floating your hands as you're typing, you're probably just going to be fine. To me, though, it does feel like I need some sort of a wrist rest. That's the main thing that I feel is missing from this keyboard. At the same time, if you're more of a hobbyist, this could be a good excuse to buy a 3D printer and see if you can design your own. I'll need to talk to the wife about that because it does feel like I want to explore it. But at the same time, there you go. It is a hobbyist keyboard. There is a Discord channel from splitkb. splitkb has been a very solid website for me to also buy keyboard parts like switches and stuff. Very decent service. When you buy the keyboard, by the way, you also get a stroopwafel. That's part of the package. It was also kind of a delight. But the palm rest, that is the thing that's, I think, missing from a somewhat ergonomic perspective. So if you're going to be interested in having a very ergonomic keyboard, that is something you might want to invest in yourself. But all in all, I guess a final thing that I do want to mention is it is also fairly affordable if you compare it to some of the other keyboards out there, especially if you already have switches and especially if you already have keycaps. You do get the columnar, stagger, and it's well below 200 bucks. So not a bad deal, especially if you consider that you don't have to solder. So yeah, pinky stagger for the win.